Hi, it's me again, Dr. Joyce Alberts, clinical psychologist based in North Canterbury, South Island, New Zealand. I decided to put up this second video today as I wanted to just take a look at this issue of home births in New Zealand and the claim from Gloriavale Christian community on their website, on their webpage under practices, that they were the initiators of the New Zealand home birth movement, and as a direct result of Gloriavale itself and their beliefs that home births in New Zealand have become an option for women, and they even give a date, 1974. So I was quite taken back by that when I read that on their website. I've read their website a number of times and I've read that paragraph a number of times, but it just didn't jump out at me. And for some reason today, it's really jumped out at me. And it's part of this whole picture of why I'm concerned of this group and why part of how I've come to my personal opinions and why I got so upset about the documentary Devotion, the Gloriavale story. Perpetuating the misinformation, presenting misleading facts, diverting our attention away from the concerns, the real concerns that are held not just by myself, not just professionals like myself, but many other people. And can talk about that as we go through. So, just a reminder, just to recap, I I will go back to that page and just read it again briefly. So, on the web page under practices, if you go down to family life, there is a section which starts off about home births are important events, and it talks about how this came about for this group. They're now based, the Gloriavale Christian community, Christian in air quotes, that they're now based on the west coast of the South Island of New Zealand, whereas they were established and initially were based in Springbank or Cust, not far from where I live. I talked about my personal encounter with Neville Cooper and how he looked me directly in the eye, not telling me about his belief, but stating as a fact that the reason I required C-sections because my faith is not strong enough. I'm not a godly enough woman. And so you can go back to that introduction video and I explain all of that there. So I read this on their website that practice developed out of Neville Cooper and his then wife Gloria's experience in Australia in the 50s and 60s, that there weren't enough midwives and doctors, right? So it was a practical solution out of circumstances. That's where it started, their practice. Then it says that when they moved to Springbank, so remember, Neville Cooper founded this church in Springbank, and it says on their website that in 1974, one young couple, says a young couple, which I find really hard to accept because I truly believe this comes from Neville Cooper. So he says, it says on the website, a young couple came to believe in 1 Timothy 2, chapter 15, and they had their first baby at home. And I'm like, okay. The next sentence, this started the modern New Zealand home birth movement, which spread throughout the country and is now an accepted option for mothers. Okay. And then the last one is the quote, and it is a quote from, in part, from the King James version of the Bible of 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15, talking about women being saved in childbearing. And I'm going to have a wee rant about that as well. Okay. I believe in facts. I believe that in order for myself or anyone else to make an informed opinion, have an informed, um, come to informed decision making, etc., you need information. So I first looked up history of home births in New Zealand. Okay, I'm gonna share this page. I realize the first thing that comes up now when you do a Google search, it's a bit of I don't know what you call it. I think it's like AI, and it gives you a summary, like it sort of summarizes all of the information that's available on different websites. So I did my search, history of home births, New Zealand. And it says that the history of home births in New Zealand is marked by a significant resurgence in the early 1970s, driven by the women's movement and a desire to reclaim the normality and intimacy of childbirth. I went, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. That fits with my sort of knowledge and understanding. I was in the 70s, a teenager. Um, or coming up to teenager. So it was weird. There was resurgence, there was women's movement, um, and for myself, what I found interesting about the statement is that my mother. So I'm from a large family, and I'm actually the seventh. And I was the first to be born here in New Zealand. My older siblings were all home births in the Netherlands. And that was just pretty much what it was. In the Netherlands, especially at that time, it's unusual for a woman to go to hospital, and it was really only for the reason of needing medical intervention. So for my mother, that it wasn't a biblical teaching or scriptural text. That was just the normality of it. So I was the first of my siblings to be born in a maternity centre or a hospital, which I remember my mum telling me, not don't remember the time of my birth, but I remember my mum telling me that she found that really unusual, and it was she was quite distressed by it. And then she subsequently, the next children that were born were also born in hospital. So the older siblings, home births. So yes, at that time, this is in the 60s, 70s, women in New Zealand didn't have the option of home births, and there wasn't the support around that. So there was a shift and a change. So if I just do a simple Google search, it doesn't say, well, there was this group in Springbank and they started having home births, and other people thought that was great and fantastic, and that started the home birth movement in New Zealand. It doesn't say that at all. It actually links it more to the women's movement. And the women's movement would have been so contrary to Neville Cooper's beliefs and his teachings. And certainly women in Gloriavale, or Springbank at the time, they were not part of the women's movement in New Zealand. They weren't feminists. They weren't part of the women's liberation. And so I just really finding that confusing to try to link these two things together. So the next website I went to, so I'm just bringing that up now. So this is the New Zealand, it's a website called New Zealand History, and I will put a link to this and can Google it yourself, but I just find it interesting. It's like my references. I always have to have references or footnotes to show where I get information from, not just telling you my thoughts and my ideas. This is, if you like, fact checking. So there was this resurgence. I'm looking at here on this website, which is taken from an essay written by two women, Joan Donnelly and Brenda Hinton, and then it was updated in 2019 by Elizabeth Cox. And it does talk about how there was this resurgence of the women's movement and this a reaction against the medicalization of childbirth, that childbirth was being seen by women as wanting to have that control back, and that not all childbirth, not all occasions require doctors, even doctors, to be involved. And women were asking and seeking and demanding their right to be able to have a say in planning how their child was to be born. Um, this essay talks about how uh, leading up to 1974, the demand for home births was growing. So this was happening before 1974. The 60s and early 70s. So there's this move to more large centralized hospitals. So these smaller birthing units and the smaller rural ones were closing down, and everything was centralized into, very medicalized birthing centres. You could understand the practicality. Well, if doctors need to be able to get there quickly, if a woman has to have a C-section, you really don't want to be transporting, kilometres and kilometres to get there. Having gone through that myself, it would have been traumatizing if that had happened. I was fortunate to be in the hospital, supported by the medical team. So, I didn't have to move anywhere else. I was just wheeled into theatre. Okay, so back to their website. Stop sharing that. So the Gloriavale website makes a statement, and it's a statement, right? As if it's a fact that as a result of a young couple who wanted to have a home birth in Springbank based on their belief of the biblical text, 1 Timothy 2, verse 15, that a woman would be saved in childbearing, that led to the whole home birth movement in New Zealand. And we should all thank Gloriavale that women now have the choice of home births as an option. This is the pattern of misinformation. There's clearly, there's no factual evidence to support that claim, and yet it's there today on their website. So that led me also to think about this Bible verse. So in talking to people who've come out of Gloriavale, and watching various documentaries and reading articles, it's my understanding that Neville Cooper and even current leadership use or refer to the King James version of the Bible, or translation of the Bible. So that's the one, if you're not familiar with it, it uses more Old English language like ye and thou. And some of the wording and phrasing in it would jar to our ears, and isn't other translations such as New International Version or the New English Revised Version. There's American version. There's many versions, obviously, or translations, and the language. That is my understanding. I'm not a theologian. I don't. I'm not an expert in this area, but having listened to many sermons and talking to ministers, it is my understanding that one of the reasons for these modern translations is to more accurately reflect what was being taught, and that these older translations, such as the King James, uses the word man and men more in line with the biological definition than talking about humans, and inclusive. So it's more exclusive to men, and not referring to women or even children. And so modern versions or modern translations are, it's my understanding, are trying to reflect that understanding, and that these older versions weren't true to the teaching or what was meant. So I have pulled up the King James, an online King James version of the Bible, and I am going to put that up for you to see. You can look this up for yourself, but I just wanted to put this up. Because when I first looked at it and I started to scroll down to verse 15, I thought, hang on, hang on, hang on. Don't take this out of context. I wanted to look at the entire context of this chapter. And I would challenge you that even a chapter of the Bible is out of context with the entire Bible for various reasons. I would challenge you to read the entire Bible, but take it or leave it. That's not what I'm here about. But what struck me when I read the entire chapter, or this entire section, two things. More modern translations would have a heading, a bit of like, this is what this section is about. This is what you can, almost like an abstract, this is what you can expect to read. This is what you can expect to take away from this section. So there's no heading. And the next thing, as I read through, what really jumped out to me, it was just like, wow, this really is almost like a summary, a 15-verse summary of the beliefs and teachings of Gloriavale. And it's interesting because it is in the New Testament, and often fundamentalist groups are thought to be more Old Testament leaning, but this is in the New Testament. So I'll give you an example. So I'll just give an example, and then I'm going to do a contrast. So if you come to verse 3 and 4, so it's the first of Joel, that's talking about the first few verses about that we must pray and give thanks. So this is really about worship, the way we worship, supplication, prayers, intercession, giving thanks, be made for all men, not mankind, men. Just take note of that, just put that away. For kings and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceful life. Okay, so it's saying we'll have quiet men and kings and authorities, so leadership. We'll have a peaceful life. We'll all have a peaceful life if men do this. Okay, so remember that. And so then it goes down to, okay, so we heard about the men. That's what the men must do. They must worship, they must pray, they must supplicate themselves to the authority of kings and others and leadership, and that will give them a good life, a quiet, peaceful life. And in verse 9, woman, in a like manner also, that women adorn themselves in modest apparel with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with braided hair or gold or pearl or costly array. And you're going to read some of that language if you go back to the Gloriavale webpage. And that's what they talk about, why they dress the way they do. Out of women should be modest and not wear bright hair, bright clothes or braid their hair or have expensive jewelry, because that's just not holy. So, and it says what women need to do. So the men need to worship, but the women who profess godliness will do that with good works. Okay, not mentioning the worshiping here. It's good works. So you see this in Gloriavale. The men are the leaders and have the authority. The women do the work, the cooking, the cleaning, teaching. They're involved in a lot of the work. And other commentators and other people who are more experts than myself have made that comment that if it wasn't for the woman and the work they do in Gloriavale wouldn't exist. It wouldn't be able to function. But going back here, so notwithstanding, she'll be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith and charity, holiness with sobriety. Let me see if I can move that. Okay, now I want to contrast. Yeah, let me move that out of the way. Oh, wrong one. Let me contrast with, okay, so this is now the New International Version. You'll see it up there, NIV, New International Version. So I wanted to look and do a contrast, and I'm trying to understand where Gloriavale, where Neville Cooper was coming from in terms of their statements and how misleading it is. So I know I've gone down a wee rabbit hole, but I just want to point out a few things. So the first thing you see, excuse me, the heading. This is what I mentioned before. So you have a heading like an abstract. So this is what it's about. It's about worship. Remember, this is one section of a chapter of a whole book, Timothy, right? Out of the whole Bible. So I really want to be cautious here, even though this is a more modern translation, and it's still not what I understand that Glorivel is meaning it to mean. And it's concerning that it's really taken um, out of context. So in here, this version does use the word men, but it also uses the word mankind. See here, verse 5. For there is one God and one mediator between God and mankind. So that's all of us, that's inclusive. It does follow that, breaking it down between men and women. The men do this, the women do that. So it says, this is Timothy writing, and he's saying, I want, right? So this is a letter from Timothy. And he's saying, I want the woman to dress modestly with decency and propriety, not with shamefacedness. It doesn't say anything about being shamed. So Glorivel seemed to like that idea that women have to be ashamed of their looks and the way they dress, and they've got to dress modestly to somehow overcome that. And you'd hear that on that documentary. I'll mention that at the very end of this video. Decency and propriety, adorning themselves, not with elaborate hairstyles or gold pearls or expensive clothes. So it's just saying, look, hey, just it's got to be careful here, right? Okay. Men have got to be careful, but maybe, women just tone it down a bit. Don't go to Kim Kardashian. Sorry, Kim, I don't know you, but I don't mean to be harsh, but if you think of the Met, is it New York Met Gala ball, and you see these outlandish, just over the top dresses and gowns and costumes, and it is meant to be that. I'm not mocking it or anything, but if you sort of think about that, well, it's not practical day to day. So it's sort of saying like, yeah, hey, let's just tone it down a bit. And it does say that women should learn in quietness and full submission, whereas the King James says women should be silent. It literally says that. Let the woman learn in silence with all subjection. This version does say about silence. Well, it says quietness. Quietness. Maybe we can talk quietly. But the old King James says silence. So remember, I described Gloria, Neville Cooper's first wife, sitting next to him when we met in Springbank. She sat in silence. She did not talk. This is why it struck me so much. And it's only become more recent that you will see on these documentaries where women are talking. But if a man is present, generally it's the man talking, not the woman. So when the women are being interviewed, they're being interviewed on their own. They're not talking in a group with men or sharing ideas with men. That's what the men do. The women are taught to because they've got to learn. Okay, and it does say here in verse 15, a woman will be saved. And remember, this is Timothy talking, and he's mentioned about Adam and Eve, and that Adam was not the one deceived, it was a woman who was deceived. And then it's saying, but woman will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. And it seems that that's what the Glorivel, Neville Cooper, because you can't talk about Glorivel without Neville Cooper and remembering that everything, their doctrines and their teachings have all come from his belief. He wanted to start this group, start this church. So he clearly believed and has taught and has impressed on people that a woman's salvation is in childbearing. Because remember, childbearing is the whole process. It's not just childbirth, it's producing children, because you can't have one without the other. Okay. So key things for me from this. I couldn't find any evidence to support the website of Glorivel Christian Community's claim that it was out of their belief of home births that the home birth movement in New Zealand started in 1974, spread across country. The documents that I've read and looked at, and I've shared some, indicate that was already happening pre-1974. It says that the increasing demand for home births led to a change in 1974, where midwives essentially started to get permission to be able to go into the homes and support women giving a home birth. So there's that. The teaching that a woman's worth and a woman's salvation is based on the number of children she has. And if she's a godly woman, silent woman, sober woman, sobriety, I think there's only one meaning for that. She doesn't wear expensive clothes or braid her hair. I still don't understand what's wrong with that. That she will be saved and she can have home births. And if she doesn't, it's a reflection of her character and her faith is not strong enough. And it horrifies me to think about women and young girls who either have lived in Goroval or still live there, that this is being impressed on them. Because what if they have reproductive difficulties? What if, for whatever reason, they require hospital treatment, emergency C-section? And I know that's happened. And I've talked to women who have been born in Goroval out of the result of their mother having a C-section, and their experience was not only was their mother treated differently, but they also, and that somehow they were also blamed. The child was blamed. And that woman, but I've been told that their whole worth and their whole salvation is based on that. I said I wanted to finish with referring back to that statement about clothing, because on that documentary that I mentioned, one of the leaders said that the reason they moved away from, remember, the pastels and the floral fabrics and the blouses and the long skirts, and they moved to the long blue dress, which has now become infamous. Apparently, just wee trivia fact, apparently it was the inspiration for the costumes in the movie The Handmaid's Tale. Um, the fact that they also wore capes, I think it's relevant, but quite clearly it was. And it's apparently that's a fact. So Glorival maybe claim that one. Maybe that one's a good one to claim. I don't know. But this male leader says in there, which reflects back to the passage I've just pointed to and back to my whole concern, is that the reason they did this was to prevent the competition between the women based on what they're wearing. So men were saying, no, we don't like it that you are competing with each other and you're trying to have a nicer, small floral printed blouse and somehow see yourself as being better off because you got that nicer material or the nicer color or a better pattern. Maybe in slightly different, I mean, horrifying. Maybe they didn't, like me, don't have a collar. I don't know, man. They were seeing this as women were competing. He openly states it. And that was the impetus to move to all the women being dressed the same. All the men, they do concede that, yeah, they decided men should also do it and cover themselves. Long sleeves, hair, not this. Long trousers, not wearing shorts. Buttoned up, at the very least, buttoned to the top collar, if not wearing a tie. Really important that other people, leaders, men, can see that you've got, even the boys, got that top button done up. So yeah, no, I should have that button. Or no, actually, I'm a female. I wouldn't be wearing this anyway. So no point. So to bring this back to my closing, I am horrified at the misleading, the information that was put out in that documentary because it fits with the misleading information that is on this website that continues to come from Gloriavale. And it's that gaslighting. It's throwing out all this facts, all this information, and diverting our attention away from the core issue that this is a system that is causing harm. There are people who've left, there are families who've left, individuals who've left, who are struggling today with what they experienced in Gloriavale. And it horrifies me to think of children who are in Gloriavale today and young girls who are feeling trapped and hopeless and helpless and who are, it's so impressed on them that their worth in life is the number of children. And to finish, no, the home birthing movement in New Zealand does not seem to have any connection to the Springbank community in 1974 or to Gloriavale at all. And I think they'd be quite horrified if they found out that was the claim. So I'm going to finish here. We'll see how this experiment goes. And if you see this on YouTube, if you want to react, comment, contact me, happy to do that. If not, it's been fun. Ka kite.